Hi everybody, I'm Elise from the blog LePetitSaintCrochet.com, and I am super excited about today's topic. I am a big fan of Amigurumi dolls, and I am going to be sharing all of my tips, all of my tricks, and also I am going to be talking about little Lula here. She is so adorable, and I cannot wait to share everything about her with you guys. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we get started, I just want to mention before I forget that all of the resources are going to be listed in the description box below. If you would like to see all of the tips laid out step by step, it's all going to be in my blog post. And I just wanted to mention, in case you missed it last week, I have your Honey Get Control of Your Whips printable. If you're interested in that, it is basically my system for getting control of all those works in progress, and I had that issue as well. You're going to be able to find a link to that in the description box below. So the first thing that I really want to talk about is this adorable doll. This is Lula and her little teddy bear, and this is from, it's actually a collaboration between the illustrator Noor Abdallah and the Instagram account Granny's Crochet Hook. I think that she is, well, she might be my very favorite doll I have ever crocheted ever. I just think that she is so precious. I love children's illustrations, and that's what I think I love most about her. She looks like she walked straight out of a children's book, and I just think she's so cute. And I love that she has her very own teddy bear. How adorable is that? She has so much character. I just think that she is so cute. I changed a couple of things. She had some crocheted ribbons, and I got lazy and I just thought, you know what, I have some ribbon, I'm just gonna slap those on. I actually think they turned out really cute. She also had a little bit of embroidered, like a little cheek up here near the eye, and I just decided that I wanted to do blush on her, and I just think it looks so cute. On the pattern, the ears look adorable, and when I put the ears on her, it looked more like those little studs that Frankenstein has on his neck, sort of a deal, and I just didn't like the way it looked with her, so I just left those off. But otherwise, I basically did the entire project exactly the way they have it, and I just think this is probably, like I said, this is one of my favorites, and I think you're really gonna love her. The instructions are great, the pattern is wonderful. I didn't find any mistakes. I felt like it was so clear cut, so well written. I will leave a link to the pattern in the description box below for you guys. It's so cute. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So my first tip is about stuffing. I get a lot of questions about this. There are some tricks with stuffing dolls in particular, especially when you are stuffing the head. They're usually round, and what can happen when you are crocheting is that it can start to look a little bit like a hexagon, because you're generally, well, a lot of patterns start with 6 single crochet in a magic ring, and then you're increasing, and sometimes if you don't stuff that head really well, it can look like a hexagon. So for the head, I really recommend that you stuff it really firmly. Then also, you're always coming back and you are smoothing the head out, smoothing any of those wrinkles, any of those weird lumpy spots. But also, you only want to add stuffing a little bit at a time. Don't grab a big old handful like this and just stuff it in there, because you're going to have a lot of lumps. It is a little bit tedious, but I just pull out a little bit. We're going to talk about tension in a minute, because sometimes stuffing issues are not about stuffing at all. They're really about tension, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. We're really just going to focus on the stuffing for right now. Also, for the legs, I also stuff those really well, because I want my Amigurumi dolls, well, especially this one, I want her to stand. Now, if we wanted her to sit, I wouldn't stuff towards the top where the leg would bend. But for her, for little Lula, I wanted her to stand up, so we stuff those legs, and the pattern actually has a really great tip for what to do with the feet to keep them flat, and I'm not going to give their secret away, but it really is a good tip, and I'm going to be using that from this point forward. But let's also talk about the arms. Arms tend to be the exact opposite. I don't overstuff my arms at all, because I used to do this in the beginning. I would stuff them and the little arms would just stick out straight like this. So now I basically stuff the hand part pretty well, and then I get less and less all the way. I stop about 2/3 of the way up the arm, and that top third of that top of the arm up to the shoulder, I no longer stuff it at all. My next tip is to choose an amigurumi doll pattern very carefully. So sometimes we get excited and we choose a doll that may be not the right fit for our skill level, our patience level. I'm going to use Lula as an example here. She is a fairly basic doll as far as stitching. She is absolutely 100% adorable. That's one of the things. Just because a project is really detailed doesn't mean it's any cuter than a more simple project. There really isn't a lot of fancy techniques in this. It's pretty standard, but I think she turned out really, really cute. One of the things that makes Lula a little less complicated is that there is very little embroidery on the face. Embroidery is one of those things that trips us all up. It is difficult. I typically never get embroidery right the first time. I have to take it out and redo it and all of those things. We all go through that. But for Lula here, she only has, it's just her little mouth. Now, you can embroider the eyes, especially if you want this for a small child where there is a choking risk, because as we've talked about before, safety eyes aren't always safe. But for her, because I'm not giving this to a child, I'm keeping her all to myself, I put safety eyes on and it is just fine. And so the only thing I had to embroider was her little mouth. I only used one strand of embroidery floss. So you know they come with 6 strands in your DMC embroidery floss, and I only pull one of those out. I find that when I use all 6 strands, or maybe even a couple of strands, sometimes it can look a little bit messy. I almost never use yarn to embroider because I do think it looks super messy most of the time. Sometimes it looks okay, but I would say for the most part, it kind of looks a little bit messy. When you're choosing an amigurumi doll pattern, take those things into account. Think about, do I have the patience for all of the details that are going to be in this project? Is there a lot of embroidery? All those things. I'm not saying don't get those types of patterns. Just keep those things in mind when you are ready to choose a pattern for yourself. My next tip is about choosing yarns. Basically the same rules and tips apply to amigurumi toys, amigurumi animals, as they do to dolls. The best thing that you can do for yourself is to find a yarn that has some structure to it, that it is not super flimsy, it's not super droopy. You want a yarn that's got some structure to it. Now that is very difficult for me to explain to you on a video. I wish I could go to a yarn shop with you and we could walk around together and feel the different yarns. But one of the best things that I really think is that if you find a yarn that has a slight halo, and I don't mean a really fuzzy yarn, but just one that is slightly fuzzy, that type of a yarn can hide a lot of imperfections. I really, really, really like that very, very much. I'm going to go ahead and share my 2 favorite yarns in case you're like, please just tell me what yarns to use. These 2 yarns are my go-tos. I talk about them all the time. So if you've seen another video of mine, you know which 2 I'm going to talk about. The first one is the Barocco Vintage. This is my absolute favorite. It is soft, it is beautiful, it's a wool blend. I absolutely love this yarn. This is the one that's got a little bit of a halo. The colors are just absolutely gorgeous. Now for Lula, I didn't have some of the colors in the Barocco Vintage, so I used my second favorite. It is the Paint Box Wool Mix Aran. I can use these interchangeably and I love them, love them, love them. This one is a little less fuzzy, but it works up beautifully. It is also a wool mix, hence the name. It is just a gorgeous yarn. You can find the Barocco Vintage a lot of different places, local yarn shops. You can find it online. You can find the Paint Box yarns at lovecrafts.com, and I will leave a link to both of these yarns in the description box below. One of the most important things that you need to consider when you are choosing a yarn is the yarn strength. One time I happened to use a particular yarn. It was 100% merino wool. It was beautiful, and it literally broke halfway when I was seaming on an ear of a bunny. I will never forget that, and now I am really, really particular, and if I'm choosing a different yarn, I always pull on it to make sure that it is strong, because that is the last thing you want to happen, is that you are seaming a piece like the arm or a leg or something else, and you are pulling because you want to pull pretty tight when you are seaming those body parts on. If it breaks, that is not good. That makes it a lot more difficult. You can fix that, but it's just more difficult, and so I really choose yarns that are very, very strong. The next, uh-oh, there she goes. I'm sorry, Lula. Let's stand up. Talking about yarn naturally leads into tension. Tension is a biggie when it comes to any type of amigurumi. You really want to have a tight tension. Maybe you are a loose crocheter and your stitches are kind of big, and for garments and blankets that works really well, but when it comes to amigurumi, you really need to tighten up your stitches. So if you are finding that you are using the correct yarn and you are using the correct hook, I always use one of these two yarns and a 3.5 millimeter hook, and that works perfectly for my tension. And you still have stitches that are really big, or you are noticing that it's just kind of not looking super neat and clean, you may have a tension issue. And my recommendation would be to go down a size in a hook and experiment a little bit with that, or you may even try a heavier weight yarn. So experiment with those two things to try to get your tension tight so that those stitches look neat and clean. Here are my tips for dealing with the holes that are natural and inevitable when you are crocheting amigurumi dolls. Number one, try a fuzzier yarn, something with a little bit of a halo like the Barocco Vintage. Number two, you know, around the neck, especially when a doll has a head and a body that are attached, and then you're decreasing around the neck. So in that area, it can get holy here because you are decreasing pretty rapidly to make a nice clean neck. Now with Lula, her head is actually sewn on. It is not attached to her body, so we don't have a lot of holes. There are a couple here, but you really don't see them. But what you can do in that area in particular is you can add a scarf. Anytime I see a lot of holes in this area, in the neck area, I'm going to add a scarf. I am going to add maybe a turtleneck sweater type of a thing, or I might even add a collar, something that is going to cover up that area just a little bit so that you can't see it, because sometimes you can't avoid those holes. So let's talk about necks for a moment. They can be very troublesome, especially if a toy's head and the body are one piece, and especially if the neck is pretty narrow. It can be difficult to stuff that area very well to keep it from flopping over. So you can do a couple of things. You could add a scarf that can add some stability there, or this is probably my favorite trick, and I think I learned about it in an amigurumi Facebook group. I'm not really sure where I learned this from, but is to get a piece of cheap felt or some fabric or some quilt batting or something like that, cutting a rectangle and rolling it up into like a little tube that fits right in that neck area. So you would have stuffing in the body all the way up to that point. Then you would have the tube. I'm using myself as I'm an amigurumi doll here. Stuffing all the way up to about here. You use the tube in the neck area. Make sure it fills all the way, and then you stuff all in the head around it. That creates a great deal of stability. It is not going to flop over. It's always going to be like that because the felt is not going to deflate like stuffing will. Isn't that a great tip? I love that tip. Now let's talk about seaming. Seaming is also one of those things that gives people a lot of problems, and I am here to give you some bad news. It just takes practice. There aren't really any great secrets that I know of. I typically use different techniques. I try different things. I experiment. So people always ask, how do you add those arms, those legs, those ears onto a toy? And you know what? I do it different from one toy to the next. So I don't have a standard way that I do it. But here is one thing that I always do, and it is something now that is just habit, is every time I finish, say for example, the arm, I always leave a very long tail so that I am able to easily seam and add that limb, that body part onto the toy. So that's my best tip for you. I know it's not a great one, but hopefully it helps a little bit. My next tip is to not skip the details. It can be really tempting, especially when you're getting close to finishing a project, to just want to be done and avoid doing some of those little things that are added to the pattern. And I'm here to tell you, don't do that. Make sure that you're adding those little details. For Lula, I was tempted not to add the buttons. Now you might think, well, it's just little buttons. What difference does it make? Actually, it kind of makes a lot of a difference. It makes the toy more real. It adds so much character. It adds that little something extra that is very noticeable once you add it. So I really recommend doing that, like adding her little teddy bear and giving him a little bow. All of those things really add something to it. Do those little extras that really add that something special to them. For example, the little squirrel that I did from Hain-chan, I added the little acorn purse. It was one of those things where it was like, well, really, should I do it? And I'm so glad I did, because yes, he is an adorable squirrel without the acorn purse, but with the acorn purse, he is absolutely the cutest little thing ever. So I really, really, really recommend doing those little details. One of my favorite details that I'm doing now is I'm adding blush. I used to not add blush to my toys and my dolls, but I am doing that more and more now because I just think it looks really cute. The other way to do that is to just make a little cheek applique. You can do that with some felt, or you could do that by just doing 6 single crochet and a magic ring and attaching it. I think adding that little facial detail with a cheek, whether it's blush or a crocheted one or a felt applique, is just the cutest touch. Another tip that I have is to really focus on the eyes. For Lula, she has very wide spaced eyes and they're very small. And I think that it works perfect with her. But one of the things that I really like to do is to experiment with different sized eyes. So maybe I'll make them a little larger than the pattern suggests, or maybe a little smaller, just to see what it does, spacing them a little further apart, a little closer together. And I never, ever, ever, never, ever add the back of the eye until I am sure that it is level and that I am sure that I like the positioning of the eyes, because I don't know if you've ever done this before, but there have been a few times when I have put the back on those eyes and then think, oh my goodness, they're not level at all, or one of them is way further over and one of them's closer in, and that is just, it's not fun to try to rip that out. And one time it kind of ruined the actual toy. So I'm really, really, really careful now. I will just stick them in there and I will look at it. I will put it down for a minute and I'll come back. I will look at it and I will make sure I use my fingernail to go right across to make sure that it is following the exact line all the way across, because that is not fun when that happens. So my last tip is to go rogue. Start experimenting with your patterns. Once you feel really comfortable and you can follow a pattern, you can do all of the embroidery, you can make your stitches really nice, they're very even, then it is time to start experimenting with your patterns. There are some personality types that absolutely love doing this and they're naturally drawn to it. And then there are folks like me who just want to do exactly what the pattern says and do it exactly right in the exact colors. I don't like to experiment that much. I do a little bit, but not a whole lot. But if you're one of those types that loves to experiment, get your fundamentals down really good and then start experimenting, adding stitches, taking away stitches, doing new things, adding little bits here and there, taking away things, and just have fun, because that's what this is all about. I hope you enjoyed this video today. I hope you love Amigurumi dolls just like I do. You're gonna find links to everything in the description box below. So if you wanna make your own little Lula, you will find it there. Also, as always, thank you so very much for spending a little bit of time with me today. I really appreciate every single one of you. If you would like this video, if you would subscribe to my channel, that would be awesome. And I will see you all very soon.